I'm Master Chief Mark Hakala. I spent 30 years in the Navy, but I've spent my whole life being intrigued by naval customs, traditions, history, heritage, and uniforms. So I'd like to share some of that enthusiasm with you using some items in my personal collection to get us started. Let's see what's in the sea chest today.
This is going to be a little different. The odd array of objects you see before you do have a connection. They all have something to do with military sites and events of historic significance. Not all of them have to do with the Navy. Not all of them are dealing with subjects that are American, for that matter. But they are all pieces of history that I've acquired over the years. The piece of wood you see is from USS Constitution, Old Ironsides, the oldest commissioned floating warship in the world, and one that defeated 5 British warships during the War of 1812. Now, for many years, the crew of USS Constitution has hosted Chief Petty Officer selectees from around the fleet during a 2-week period in the summer. One group would come during 1 week, one would come during the other. During my last 4 years in the Navy, I would drive up to Boston with my collection of uniforms and insignia and whatnot and give a presentation to each of the 2 weekly groups. And I did that for 4 years straight. So they decided to thank me and presented me with this piece of wood that was taken off during one of the refits. In the early days of our country, the Barbary states of North Africa, which encompass modern-day Libya, Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco, had some rather unfriendly practices towards ships of other nations that sailed in the Mediterranean. The Barbary rulers demanded a monetary payment, an annual tribute, to allow the safe passage of your nation's ships, sort of like paying protection money to the mafia. When Thomas Jefferson was president, he said, "No, I don't think so anymore," and he sent the Navy Marine Corps team to try to take care of business. The turning point in the First Barbary War was the Battle of Derna from April to May of 1805. William Eaton, a former Army officer who had been consul to the Barbary States, was joined by U.S. Marine Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon, along with a force of 8 other Marines and 500 mercenaries. They attacked and captured the city of Derna, and for the first time in our history, the Stars and Stripes were raised in victory on foreign soil. This victory is remembered in a line from the Marines' hymn, "To the Shores of Tripoli." A few years ago, when trade was open between the United States and Libya, my wife worked for a company that was going to be one of the first ones to do business there. And returning from his first trip there, her boss brought back this souvenir bottle of sand, so I have my own little piece of the shores of Tripoli. The reverse side of this coin reads, "This coin struck from parts of the frigate Constellation, the first ship of the U.S. Navy." Pretty neat little thing to have. And additionally, it serves as a lifetime free pass aboard the ship in Baltimore. There's only one problem. The coin is not what it says it is. USS Constellation was one of the original 6 frigates. And by the way, it was not the first one. That was USS United States. So that part of the claim on the back of the coin is wrong. Now, the frigate Constellation, launched in 1797, was a 164-foot, 38-gun frigate. The ship that is in Baltimore is actually the 1855 30-gun sloop of war, 199 feet long, USS Constellation. How the confusion? In 1853, the frigate Constellation was getting a little long in the tooth, and the Navy decided to scrap her and sell the parts. At nearly the same time, the keel was laid for this new sloop of war. And since there was some overlap of time, one being built up, one being torn down, I suppose some people eventually believed that some of the old ship wood went into the new ship. And eventually people just believed that it was the old ship. A few decades ago, a couple of Navy civilians started doing some very extensive research. They actually found the documents listing every piece of the frigate that was sold. So they could account for every piece of wood, and none of that wood went to the sloop Constellation. Well, for many years, the organization that operates Constellation as a museum held on strongly to the fact that this was the frigate. Eventually, they got some new blood in who changed the organization's story to the truth. Now, there is one thing historically significant about the sloop of war Constellation. That was the last sail-only warship designed and built for the United States Navy. And it's pretty cool. And if you're in Baltimore, in Inner Harbor, if you have the chance, it's worth seeing. These 3 bullets all came from the Battle of Gettysburg. Just to cover it up front, these came out of a private collection that had been put together years before Gettysburg became a national battlefield park. So at that time, it was legal to look for and keep artifacts. Now, of course, it isn't. All 3 of these come from a specific area from a specific time in the battle. These are from the first day, Wednesday, July 1st, 1863. That first day of the battle was in and of itself one of the bloodiest days in American history. There were more American casualties on this day than there were on D-Day. All 3 of these say Reynolds Woods. This area north and west of the town of Gettysburg has been called McPherson's Woods because it's located on McPherson's Ridge. It got the unofficial name of Reynolds Woods because the Union general in charge of the lead element of infantry that was coming onto the battlefield was shot just at the edge of these woods. The correct name, though, is Herbst Woods, because that was the name of the family that owned it. Now, this period photograph shows the woods some distance off of the Chambersburg Pike, and over at the right where the red arrow is, you'd find a small stream called Willoughby Run. All 3 of these bullets came from Herbst Woods on 2 different sides of Willoughby Run. The fighting there was absolutely vicious. Eventually, the Union forces were just grossly outnumbered. In this illustration, you can see the Iron Brigade in a single rank holding off 3 oncoming ranks of Confederates that are just coming out of the Herbst Woods. The casualties, such as these just outside of the Herbst Woods, were staggering. USS Olympia. This coin actually was struck from a piece of USS Olympia, which was Commodore Dewey's flagship at the Battle of Manila Bay on May 1st, 1898. In this battle from this ship, he directed a victory that completely destroyed the Spanish Navy. Olympia has another claim to fame. After World War I, USS Olympia brought back the remains of the original unknown who was interred in Arlington National Cemetery at the Tomb of the Unknowns. The ship is still afloat. It's a museum ship in Philadelphia, and it is absolutely worth seeing. From the 1st through the 26th of June 1918 was the Battle of Belleau Wood in France during World War I. While there were many units that fought the Germans in this battle, none holds it as a more precious battle honor than the United States Marine Corps. At this time, the 4th Marine Brigade was attached to the U.S. Army's 2nd Infantry Division. During this battle, the 9,500-man brigade lost 1,000 killed in action, 4,000 wounded, poison-gassed, or missing. It's a 55% casualty rate. The Navy was there too. Hospital corpsmen were in the thick of it right next to their Marines. And one of them, Pharmacist Mate First Class John Balch, charged into machine gun fire to retrieve a wounded Marine. For this action, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. Through all this intense fighting, the trees in Belleau Wood took a pounding. A few years ago when I visited there, I met up with the curator of the Belleau Wood Cemetery. And he told me that when survivor trees, those that had actually been around during the battle, died, he saved pieces of the tree and had them branded with BW for Belleau Wood. And he'd give these away typically to Marines. Fortunately, I got one of them before he was told not to do it anymore. Quick aside, he told me that the gray areas inside the wood are where bullets had been. The Dieppe raid, 19 August 1942, was an Allied amphibious attack on the German-occupied city of Dieppe in Normandy, France. A force of 6,000 troops, 1,000 of which were British, 5,000 of which were Canadian, and only about 50 were U.S. Army Rangers, were sent to test the feasibility of landing, temporarily holding a German-occupied city, do damage to the German military, and capture intelligence. Unfortunately, every possible thing that could have gone wrong did. Starting with the fact that the Germans already knew that it was coming. Through their network of spies, they learned about it ahead of time, and some of the ships crossing the channel morning of the raid ran into a group of German ships. If nothing else, they radioed that information back too, just to confirm. Once they did get to the beach, they found it covered with these stones, which are larger than golf balls, difficult to walk on, and near impossible for tanks to move on. The reinforced Germans had the entire beach sighted for artillery, for machine guns, everything else. And the operation was a fiasco. Of the nearly 5,000 Canadians who took part in the battle, 3,367 were killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. 68% casualties. One of the Canadian units that took part in the raid was the Essex Scottish Regiment of Canada. This is the regiment that my father-in-law would serve in. So as one of his unit's largest historical battles, I'd heard him talk about it quite a bit, but he'd never been there. Fortunately, a few years ago, we were able to take him there, and he was able to see his regiment's memorial on the beach. The grim lessons learned at Dieppe on what not to do during an amphibious assault paid off 22 months later on June 6, 1944. Now, the military had adopted the practice of not letting every Tom, Dick, and Harry know the date of a scheduled invasion or assault or battle. So during the periods of planning and preparation, rather than say at 0500 we're going to go ahead and start this, they would use a marker for the time. They would call it H hour. And the marker for the day when the assault was going to take place was referred to as D-Day. So although there was a D-Day for every island assault the Americans made, the name D-Day has come to be associated with the assault on Normandy. Utah and Omaha beaches were attacked by the Americans. And in addition to soldiers, there were sailors there too. You had everything from landing craft coxswains to beachmasters to aid stations. This picture is my wife and me a few years ago at Dog Green sector of Omaha Beach. This is where the opening scenes of the movie Saving Private Ryan were set. There have been a number of American military engagements in and around the Philippines, but the biggest was the Battle of Leyte Gulf, taking place between the 23rd and the 26th of October 1944. Leyte Gulf was the largest naval battle of World War II, and some consider it the largest naval battle of all time. Over 200,000 Navy personnel from both sides took part in the battle. Now, this particular sand has an interesting story. During the Gulf War in 1990-1991, I was deployed to Okinawa. The rest of my battalion was further deployed to the Philippines. While they were there, the volcano Mount Pinatubo erupted. They eventually came back to Okinawa, and before we returned to the United States, there were Marines who were performing U.S. Customs duties. So every person had to report to one of these people. As I declared whatever I had to declare, he asked, "Do you have any sand from Mount Pinatubo?" I said, "No, I wasn't even over there." He said, "Would you like some?" And he handed me this urine sample bottle filled with volcanic ash from Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines. The Battle of Iwo Jima, 19 February to 26 March 1945. There were 3 airstrips on this dormant volcano, and the U.S. wanted them to be able to use as a staging base for attacks on the Japanese home islands. Marines and sailors landed on this beach of black volcanic sand, if you can call it sand, and there was a steep shelf to be able to get up and over onto the main part of the island. And trying to do it through this sand was a challenge. One step forward, you'd slide 2 steps back. The casualties were staggering as the Japanese, most of them, fought to the death. In 1991, I was able to visit Iwo Jima, actually go to the island. This wood was the lid of a Japanese ration box. And you can see the corroded out 50 caliber shell. And you can see that famous black sand. Obviously, one of the most famous things about Iwo Jima is the fact that there were 2 significant flag raisings there, the second one being the most remembered. Here in the image of the first flag raising, see an individual to the right of the pole holding on to it, whose face you can't quite see. That's Pharmacist Mate 2nd Class John Bradley. While we were on the island, we went up to the top of Mount Suribachi, and I had the once-in-a-lifetime honor of raising 5 flags over Iwo Jima. Okinawa was the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific Theater during World War II. D-Day on Okinawa was April 1st, 1945. There was vicious fighting on the ground, an equally vicious naval battle taking place nearby. This is when Japanese kamikaze attacks were the most vicious and the most prevalent. During the course of this battle, we sustained 70,000 casualties. We lost 36 ships that were sunk. And an additional 386 ships were damaged. Most of these casualties were from kamikaze attacks. Here you can see a small vial of sand and a bent .50 caliber round that's been fired. From 1982 to 1984, the U.S. contingent of the multinational force in Lebanon was supplied by a Marine amphibious unit, which was centered on a battalion landing team. Starting at the end of August of 1983, Iranian-backed militia began attacking American positions. These attacks became more frequent, more intense, and began resulting in casualties. I was there at this time as a hospital corpsman 3rd class, assigned to a platoon in a rifle company. Here you can see us getting ready to medevac a wounded Marine. I'm the one on the far left in this picture with my sleeves down. Ultimately, on October 23, 1983, the Marine headquarters building was attacked by a truck bomb that set off what was called the largest non-nuclear blast on the face of the earth since World War II. If you look in the lower right of this photo, you see a line of sandbag bunkers. I was in the far right one when this picture was taken. So here you see a couple of different things. The ubiquitous red sand that you saw everywhere and got into all your clothes everywhere around Beirut. A couple pieces of shell fragments, which commonly gets misidentified as shrapnel. Shrapnel was actually a very specific kind of artillery round. And you see my dog tags and chain. Now if you look in the middle of the chain, you see something kind of wrapping around the chain. That is the jacket of a 7.62 millimeter armor-piercing Kalashnikov round, AK-47, that I found in the sandbags in front of me the morning after a firefight. Figured since it didn't get me, might as well keep it for good luck. The Gulf War, 2 August 1990 to 28 February 1991. A 35-nation coalition led by the United States took on Iraq after they invaded and annexed Kuwait. There was all kinds of U.S. Navy involvement in this conflict, everything from aviation to a battleship and submarines launching Tomahawk land attack missiles at the Iraqis. There were Navy components on the ground, including Navy Fleet Hospital. A friend of mine was over there during that time, and when he returned, he gave me this abandoned Iraqi dog tag that he had found. Okay, time for the bonus round. This dime-sized silver Roman denarius portrays the likeness of the Emperor Hadrian. It was he who directed the Roman legions in Britain to build the 73-mile defensive fortification in northern England known as Hadrian's Wall. This was the northernmost edge of the Roman province of Britannia. This coin was minted in Rome between 125 and 128 AD, the last 3 years of the construction of Hadrian's Wall.
Check back soon for more content. Thanks for watching.